you're talking about those types of numbers, right? When you're providing the number one in math, when you're achieving number one in reading, when you're providing CTE, when you're adjusting your strategic plan, when you're removing distractions from the classroom, when you're implementing policies that put the parents in control, when you have dress codes that are in place that are designed to keep the focus on the kids, when you're removing cell phones from the classroom, you're doing all of these things at a West Ada level. At some point, I hope that people simply say, why don't we take the win?
Mr. Binetti, thank you for coming in today.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. Appreciate it.
We had a great year this year in West Ada. A lot of good things happen. And again, my kids go to West Ada schools. I very much like it. I make no qualms about that. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, but a good year in my opinion.
Yeah, no, we think it's been a really, really good year. And so my opportunity here, I think, is to just talk about the year in review, and both from a sort of where do we stand, what are some of the things that we got accomplished over the course of the year, our achievements, and then, of course, where we're going next. So I'm hoping we can talk about all those things.
Let's start it off. Let's hit it up. And again, I like West Ada, but I'm only attached to 2 specific schools. So understanding more about the district, I did have an opportunity to speak with Dr. Bubb throughout the year, as well as Marcus Myers, the Chief Academic Officer. I've obviously called you a bunch about tech and whatnot in schools. So help me understand more about the district.
Well, I mean, the first biggest accomplishment is that we came in number one in reading and number one in math for large school districts, right? And that was a tremendous accomplishment. And so when you're striving to provide academic excellence, you can't do better than number one,
right? And
so getting those was a combination of a lot of effort, obviously mostly from our teachers, but all the way administration, all the way down through board of trustees, our volunteers, parents. That was something that was really, really impactful. And that was sort of seconded by the U.S. News and World Report rankings that just came out that has number 14 in education, right? So
wait, the U.S. News Reports ranked Idaho or West Ada?
States, all states.
And we made 14th?
Yeah, statewide. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a huge improvement.
Yeah, I think so too. So we're contributing that, obviously being the largest school district in the state, for our top academic performance. But I think that's probably, the number one highlight for what got accomplished in the year in review.
If I may, that would be less impressive if we were number 1 in spending and ranked number 14 in performance. But we're what, like number 48 in spending?
Yeah, we moved up 3 spots.
Okay,
48.
So we're 48 in spending,
and that's actually
14th in performance.
Yeah, and that's actually Idaho, because West Ada is considerably less than that, right? So the Idaho average is $9,000. And the nationwide average is $15,000 and per student,
right?
Per student. And in West Ada, we're $6,200 per student. So we are far and away the lowest amount of per pupil spending, and yet achieve excellent results.
Wait, so the state average is actually 50% greater than what West Ada does.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and the nationwide average is 50% greater than that, right? And there are some school districts that are $25,000 per student and more.
Dave, how do we get a hold of that extra $3,000? Come on, what's happening in West Ada? I mean, look, it's still great, but let's talk about this. How do you feel that the state and specifically West Ada is achieving these results if we are so far underneath what the rest of the country is doing?
Well, so look, I mean, classroom mostly is our teachers, right? So the teachers are the ones who are delivering the excellent product in the classrooms day in and day out. So, I mean, anytime that you look to educational success, you have to first start with what's happened in the classroom. But then I think we also are doing things really, really well from an administration standpoint, right? Our G&A, general and administrative expenses, are less than 6% of our total budget.
For somebody who doesn't really understand a lot about that, where does less than 6% fall? Like, is it generally accepted that you should be under 3% or just like under 10%? What is it?
Oh, well, for the corporate world, it's under 9%. If you have under 9% G&A, then you're considered an efficient company, right? Okay. Now, it's not totally analogous because, we're a governmental entity fundamentally. But when you look at some other districts approach 17% G&A and more, right? So we're on the very, very low end of that. And you can just see it in the amount of money that we spend on a per student basis, right? I mean, it is dramatically lower than it's dramatically lower even in the state of Idaho, right? We're among the very lowest in the state of Idaho. And then nationwide, it's I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, we spend a third of what what's spent on average. And if you were spending a third and getting terrible results, that's one thing. But when you're spending a third and you're in the top 15, I mean,
That's pretty wild.
It's great.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. Okay, so and I was at a band performance last night, actually, and they had mentioned that a group out of Eagle High had actually won best in category at a national competition.
No. World competition.
World.
Eagle High.
I thought it was like
world champs, and it was their first go at it. Yeah, very proud.
That is wild. I have heard fantastic things about the band program at Eagle High, but until last night, I had no idea that it was that good.
Yeah, it's amazing and doing fantastic, amazing work there. So yeah, Eagle High world champs.
God, man, that's fantastic.
And that's just the academic performance, right? I mean, we also want to layer on top of that, you know, as we've said, our strategic priority is college and career ready, right? So we're also talking about our career technical education programs, right? Where we have EMT certification. I have a list because I would forget it otherwise. Construction, culinary arts, collision repair, electrician, plumbing, HVAC, childcare. And these are all certifications that our students can get before they ever graduate and go immediately into a trade or become part of what's now being called the work belt generation, right? When you see these reports where a lot of next generation is looking at college and giving it a second thought, saying, not so sure I want to take on all that debt when I could be making $60,000 or more straight out of high school, can be life-changing, particularly here in the state of Idaho. So the support that we're doing and providing all of that from the CTE standpoint, I think is another just super, super important highlight. And I mean, I went and donated my truck to the collision repair center that's maintained down at Meridian High. And I walked in, I could not believe all the students there doing body repair, doing engine work. And it looks like you walk into a pristine car repair shop. It's just incredible. And then you go down to the Culinary Arts Center, that's just right next to Renaissance, and they serve meals to the public, right? And they're delicious meals, right? That's preparing people and for restaurateurs, both on the management side and on the kitchen side. And so that range of opportunity that's being provided, both from an academic perspective, number one in reading, number one in math, the CTE, we're second to none, giving students all these opportunities. Yeah, that's something that we're very proud of, and I think rightfully so, particularly when you consider at what cost we're delivering it all.
Right. I spoke with a buddy from jiu-jitsu actually recently, Jeremiah Grossman, and it turned out I didn't know this of him. I knew he really liked cars, and I invited him because, you know, like he has some really
it's a great
cool
podcast.
cars. Yeah. And I find out as we're sitting down that he is one of like the foremost cybersecurity people in the world, or was at least for a long period of time. I'm like, wait a minute, full stop. And we had this very long, interesting discussion also about the value of college. And again, he was self-taught, didn't go to, anyway, incredible guy. And I think what the hesitation that I've always had coming down to devaluing college is, what's the alternative though? And until there's an answer for alternative, you don't just want a generation of people to be destitute. It has to be like, okay, you have college or you could do this thing. It can't be college or, just good luck with whatever you're doing. Yeah. So the fact that, not the fact, but the aspects of the CTE program that West Ada is really bringing to the community that finally gives a viable answer with, if I'm not going to go to college, what am I going to do that has immediate value or I can invest in heavily as far as learning and obviously career, which again is really great.
Yeah. And when you combine that with some of the actions that the legislature and governor have done, such as the launch program, right, where you can start to do any supplemental tuition that you want over and above that to the tune of $8,000 for our recent graduates, then you don't even have to worry about certification hurdles, right? Because that can be addressed with that. So, and I think, from our perspective, it's one of the things that we accomplished this year. That was right at the beginning of the year, but it was the setting of our strategic plan, right? And our strategic plan really boiled down to, I can encapsulate in one sentence, college and career ready.
Right.
because typically it's been a sort of either or, and you track off and, this is the way that you go. And then, oh, by the way, we're really looking value at our go on rate, which is, if you go on to college, we consider that a success. And if you don't, that's not. We've expressly said, no, we want to have, and we already have above 80% participation in our CTE program. And so even people that are going to college, we want them to have that participation as well, so that they get that benefit and know that there's something that they can fall back on if it actually turns out that they matriculate and college turns out not to be for them. So giving our students the largest breadth of opportunity is something that we think is really important as a district and are delivering on. So we're pretty happy about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about the Advanced Opportunity Program, the Fast Forward program?
Yeah.
Because that's something that I feel like is not really tapped into, or at least talked about as much as, say, the Launch program. And I'm not saying I'm right about that. I'm just saying that that's something that I don't think finds real representation. People are talking frequently about CTE. They're talking frequently about Launch, but you can earn college degrees. You can have other things that, I mean, these are not mutually exclusive. And the Advanced Opportunity, I can't remember exactly how much money, but it's to the tune of several $1,000s. I think it's just north of $4,000 that can be used for concurrent enrollment in junior colleges or other programs in high need areas.
Yeah. Well, more than that, I mean, it typically just pays for it, right? Entirely. Right. So yeah. And I think the answer to your question is that it's been around longer, right? So it's just the Launch program is new this year. So that program has been around a lot longer, but yeah, no, we can still, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's a substantial number of our students that graduate with AA degrees in their pocket. So they're 2 years ahead of the game, all paid for, right? So we have the International Baccalaureate program. Of course, we support strongly military recruitment, right? So we have fairs. In fact, one of the things that just absolutely blew my mind, because it's the first time I've ever been there, which is another program that we put on, although this year really took off, which is our college and career fair. And we takes place down in Mountain View this past year. And we had several thousand people with over 100 vendors, and those 100 vendors were colleges, both local colleges that are out of state, electrician firms, plumbing firms, childcare firms, ambulance firms, Department of Public Works, all branches of the military and Guard. And they were all there in one place, and a student could walk by and they could get dozens of career opportunities or college opportunities all in one place and get all the information. And I mean, I went in and I didn't quite know what to expect. Parking lot was packed. I had to park way in the end to try to get in. Thousands of people there. And just looking at the students that are like, in fact, one who said, I thought I was going to do X, and after talking with them, I think I'm going to do Y, right? And so again, it's just another thing that West Data does to provide that breadth of opportunity for our students, so that they get to see everything, try everything, be prepared for everything, so that we make them the best position for success that they can be as they move on in their lives.
Dr. Bob had mentioned a student that he worked with or spoke with that was indicating that she had initially wanted to be a nurse, but had used one of the West Data programs and realized, okay, I don't actually want to do that anymore. And I thought, it's always great to hear somebody say like, oh my God, I found my love for nursing. Like, and I, started this journey in high school and, blah, blah, blah. That's great. But it's also great to hear somebody saying, I just dodged a bullet because I realized I actually don't like this, and I would have committed significant resources, time, energy, everything into this path that I would inevitably find out later on, oh, I don't actually like this. And now you're committed to it. You've taken prereqs. It's part of your identity. Oh, I'm like going to go into nursing school. So just having, you talk about people that have access. It's just, I just so appreciate that people can have, dip their toe in and be like, yeah, no, that's not for me.
No is important as a yes in that situation, right? Getting the answer to the question, right? And so yeah, that's our goal. And that college and career fair was put together by Nikki Cheppers, our chief of staff, and she does an outstanding job. I walked around and my jaw was open the whole time. It was unreal. So I think it'll be even greater to go next year. Yeah.
Talk to me, and this is not a great question, but okay. Talk to me about some of the lowlights from the year, because I think there's a lot of great things that we have talked about and we're going to keep talking about that are great. But I also know you're a very critical person, as you and I have spoken in private about things that are not going as well as you want or things to be worked on. What are those things? Because, yeah, we can all be super fans. Great. But there are plenty of people who also have other issues that, may want to hear as well.
Yeah, so I think the top two for me are, in increasing order of importance, is transportation is still a challenge, right?
The busing system.
So, and listen, in terms of year in review, we did make some improvements to it. Well,
Sure.
I should say improvements for some. We had to make some difficult decisions, right? So, I'll cut it relatively short, but here in West Ada, we have schools of choice, right? And schools of choice are effectively like charter schools that operate within the district, right? And this can include Idaho Fine Arts Academy, which is focused on the performing arts, or Renaissance, which is more academic college prep, or Galileo, which is a STEM focused school, right? And we have these interspersed throughout the district at various levels. Elementary through high school. However, because there's sort of smaller numbers of schools, they represent themselves individually larger geographic areas, right? We have total 58 schools in the district,
Sure.
spread over 382 square miles. But there's only 9 schools of choice. 9 schools of choice. And so each of them represents a large geographic area. And up to this point, they'd all been served individually as if you were going to your local boundary school, right? Which made them vastly larger areas. And then you had to also do sort of shuttle joins, and it really added a vast layer of complexity to the system. So we needed to scale that back because we had too much pressure on the system as a whole. And we were seeing overall, I think it was 7% of our buses leave the yard scheduled to be late. Right. Because, because in large part of that, there are other issues, but in large part because of that. And so we had to make a decision where we changed the schools of choice individual door-to-door service to a more regional service. So now it's going to go over larger areas, are going to be fewer stops, and students are going to have to travel larger distances to get to those stops, or have to be shuttled by their parents to get to those stops. But that's relieving a lot of the pressure on the transportation system. But that was a change that we needed to make. It's for school of choice. It's unfortunate because they're going to see a lower degree of service. But on balance, the system overall is more robust and more predictable, and it's a decision that we needed to make.
Right. And I obviously don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it was something like a third of the buses were servicing 10% of the students for this school choice, roughly something there.
Yeah, they're roughly like that, something like that.
Right. And the requirement for transportation pretty much stops at your school boundary, right? So West Ada was, or am I misunderstanding it?
So the actual law says where practicable, right? You can offer transportation where practicable, right? So if
but you had some boundaries that were over 100 square miles, correct?
Oh yeah, but that was because of the school of choice, right? So,
we're going pretty fast.
Where practical means that you're not required to provide transportation, right? If it's practical to do it and it fits, then they'll partially pay for it. But yes, that was the area that it was, there's the elementary system and the middle school system layered on top of that, and the high school system layered on top of that, and then the school of choice, which operated entirely different dimension.
Sure.
It was too much. So that change had to be made. But look, transportation is going to continue to be an issue, and some of them are things that are beyond our control, like construction, right? Those of us who live in Eagle, man, we're suffering through that.
Right.
Sewer repair and the work on Eagle Road and State Street. So some of that's not going to be avoidable, but we had an obligation because, again, buses were leaving the yard scheduled to be late.
Right.
You got to do something about that.
Right.
And next year, I suspect that we will have some additional challenges because we had to change busing providers. So Cascade Student Transportation has been our vendor for a very long time, and they were outbid by Durham, which provides for the Boise School District. So there's going to have to be some growing pains that'll be associated with that, I'm sure. So transportation is going to be an issue that still needs attention.
Yeah, one of my friends from jiu-jitsu was saying, "Hey, why don't we just, like the school district shouldn't be taking over busing. They should contract it." It's like, yeah, they are. They are, and they're actively taking bids, and they're actively changing providers, and they're actively trying to drive down the cost of transporting, 40,000+ students, whatever the number is. I mean, West Ada is a huge district. It's the largest district in Idaho. Yeah. It's number 2 or number 3 for employer in the state.
Number 2 in the Treasure Valley.
Okay,
it might be number 2 in the state, but the state might actually have more employees. But definitely number 2 in the Treasure Valley behind St. Louis.
And the transportation network
is the largest public transportation in the state of Idaho. So argue in the North Pacific Northwest, but yeah.
So we have this mass system that is, not just, again, it's very complex.
Yes.
So when I was doing the podcast, I did one with PTA President Alexis Morgan about the busing system. She has kids in the district, as do I. And we sat down because, again, watching the board meeting that was addressing this, like, wow, there's a lot of information here. And so we attempted to kind of parse it out for people in a conversational format. It's really, really difficult. And it's a crazy web, and there's just not an easy answer.
Yeah, no. And so, but, I mean, you asked where we need to work on. We need to work on that, right? And we're going to have to do more work. And so, partially we're trying to use information technology tools, right? So GPS, providing tools to the bus drivers so that they can get updates in real time if they need to adjust their schedule, as opposed to using, the old paper, not to mention the paper on as you're driving is a bad idea.
Yeah, right.
Student discipline on busing is going to be an issue that we're addressing. So there's going to be some work that needs to be done there. So that's that. And then I think, a larger issue is just communication in general, right? When you're operating with over 100,000 parents, 40,000 students, operating in multiple grades, multiple levels, multiple skill levels, multiple activities, you can get overloaded on communication pretty easily. We've gotten some feedback from our staff and patrons and so forth. And, there's some differences of opinion, but certainly from the parental perspective, they're looking for a little bit more compact information. Like for instance, if you have 4 or 5, 6 students, you get hammered 5, 6, 7 times,
Right.
And so, and again, it's the same thing. It's a very complicated communication system, right? And but both the form of that and the content and the technical ability behind it is still something that I feel we can do better. I think we made some improvements, to be sure, but I still think that we can make some significant improvements on communication and have channels that are both utilized more effectively and get that signal to noise ratio a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
So that those would be the 2 areas that I think that we are and will continue to need some more work on.
Gotcha. Those are 2 good ones. And again, I recognize the problem with community. I mean, like, I do communication all day long, right? Like, it's very, when you're talking about, making things compact, even when I do a short clip, I'm cutting out like 1/4 second pauses because people's attention span, and again, there's not a criticism, this is just the way the world is. Your attention span is so limited that if I have a 1/2 second pause, somebody takes a long breath, and I don't chop it out, you're going to lose a large portion of the viewership just there. So I appreciate how difficult it is to grind down, and you're always playing with okay, is this absolutely necessary to communicate? And then there's, well, if we don't communicate, it's this, and man, it's a tough one.
Well, and then there are individual decisions that are more local. So, you should centralize and consolidate. Well, no, because the principal at Andrus is going to be different than the principal at Rocky Mountain. And, and that's going to be different from a STEM need. And then, you got the band, and, there's lacrosse and football. And,
oh my gosh, I can see all the emails right now. And text messages.
Right. And then there are situations where you don't even necessarily have a roster. So like it's tryouts. And so how do you get information out to people when you don't even really have their contact information? Do you blast out the entire school saying there's an open gym for volleyball? So, they're always more complicated than they appear to be on the surface. And look, I mean, this is not a new problem. This is a problem that everybody struggles with, large organizations, small organizations. Right. Communication is a tough nut to crack. But that said, if it's an area that needs improvement, we're going to work on it.
Awesome. What else is on your list over here?
Well, I mean, we started off with the strategic plan, right?
Yeah.
And so that was something that was initiated a couple of years ago. And that strategic plan was something that was contracted with a California vendor that produced an initial document that, let's just say, it didn't necessarily reflect Idaho values. And so the board said, yeah, we're going to need to redo this and put together a committee and had that strategic plan that was completely revamped. So it dropped a lot of the priorities that were that vendor's priorities and replace them with the priorities that are the West Ada School District, right? And
vendor priorities, gosh.
Yeah. Anyway, you could see him dancing around that issue.
Right.
Yeah, it was god awful. But that was how the year started, right? So then we started off with that strategic plan that focused in on college and career ready as our single sentence strategy, and it's really that and that makes us strategic, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something that we focused on and oriented our tactical approach towards that and having different metrics and benchmarks that are geared towards each of those things that we're trying to accomplish within the district, right? And so communication is on that list, transportation is on that list, right? Which are areas that are going to need improvement, but so was academic performance, right? And again, that was really, justified with our top performance in reading and top performance in math, as well as fiscal stewardship, which again, really knocked out of the park. And so continuing to use that as our benchmark that represents the community, that represents the values and the effort that was put in both in the administration standpoint as well as the board to align that strategic plan to what we think is going to be our future and to see that start to pay off results. That's how we started off the year, and that was a good win.
Yeah, that's a big one, especially again, like you're pointing out, when you have quantifiable things like first and first.
Yeah,
like that's a good one.
First is always a good place to be.
Yeah. What are other academic things that you feel could be improved? Because I think a lot of people would say like, well, what progress is to be made if you've made first in the state in math and ELA?
So look, I mean, we can always be number one in the nation. That would be my goal. So it's nice to be number one in Idaho, but there are other school districts that might have better performance than us. I'd like to get on top of them. But no, I think that where I look at it, it's really the CTE. Even though we offer tremendous things, I think that's just someplace I always want to make sure that we're focused on, because what can happen is even when you do these rankings, a lot of the rankings use the go-on rate as one of the criteria for their decision-making process in terms of how successful a district is, right? And I don't think that's a good metric, right? And partially because I think that the intrinsic value of higher education is on the margin declining. And that doesn't mean that, people shouldn't focus on that and give yourself the range of options, again, college and career ready. But it also ignores things like, a large portion of our student population goes on mission. So they're not going to be going on to college immediately. They may have 18 months or 2 years where they go on mission. And so it's like, okay, does that mean that your academic performance suffered because they had a religious obligation? No. So I think that even where we're performing now, I think that when you factor in that, we're probably actually even doing even better than those numbers would suggest. So I think that there are tweaks that we can do all over the place, right? Particularly in use of technology in the classroom, which I know is a concern of yours that we've talked about many times. And making the best use of that technology and not overuse of technology, I think, is an area that we can always improve pedagogically. There are other new techniques that are coming in that can be explored a little bit further, things that are more, less Aristotelian in their approach and more like what I would call a Feynman method, where you're sort of teaching, right? We just saw a presentation called the Scribe program that's operated out of Renaissance, where the students are actually teaching each other, right, how to do writing and expanding that to different schools, right? The program looked awesome. They're running pilots at Hawaii. They're running pilots at Rocky. I'd like to see that expanded to all of our schools around the district, right? And so that would be a different approach towards doing that. But that's where I actually got my start in education. I became a tutor while I was at college for the other students, because interestingly enough, I was a very poor writer when I entered Cal, and I learned how to write through a series of rudimentary classes, and it was a painful experience, but I learned how to write, and then I actually became a huge fan and then thought I could help people with it. So peer-to-peer education definitely has a soft spot in my heart. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think that people everything is moving forward. I mean, the Red Queen hypothesis, right? Alice in Wonderland, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in place, right? So
I thought it was the Queen of Hearts.
Red Queen hypothesis.
It could be a diamond.
No. Anyway, they're red.
They're red. Okay, fine.
But I mean, it's an actual thing, right?
Okay.
It's an actual management principle that you have to constantly be working.
Sure.
If as soon as you start to relax and you say, I made it, then suddenly you look and you're like 10 rows back. Right?
Sure.
So
a lot is said about CTE, and a lot is said about students who don't look at college as the only option.
Mm-hmm.
Is there enough being done for students who say, no, I'm intent on going to college, and I want the best college right out of the blocks. I want the best opportunities and selections for myself. I want the most AP classes, all of these, whatever things might enrich a student's application going into a four-year university right out of high school. Is West Ada doing enough for those kids?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we both have our AP programs that start in freshmen, right? When you can start taking AP classes and earn college credit and take AP exams right out of that. We have Renaissance itself, which is much more focused on academics, has a tremendous, not only graduation rate, but tremendous college rate and very successful going into, larger colleges. Again, this wasn't U.S. News report, but somebody just had ranking and we had both Eagle High and Meridian and Renaissance that were in the top 500 schools nationally, right? Ranked. And I don't know how they get that detailed. That said, right?
Sure.
That was good accomplishment. As well as you mentioned, the Fast Forward program, which is available for anyone to get their AA or International Baccalaureate, which are also available at any of our campuses, right? So, there's plenty of opportunity. Not to mention our Gifted and Talented program, right? So the Gifted and Talented program, we still maintain. It hasn't been funded by the state for some time, although the state has provided a ton of funding. So I don't want to badmouth the legislature. They really stepped up this year. But the Gifted and Talented program is something that we operate in West Ada. That's being canceled all across the country. Gifted and Talented programs are being canceled. We're only redoubling our efforts on that. And so that can happen as early as third grade and continue all the straight on through high schools, honors, college prep, AP. All those things are available all throughout West Ada, not to mention the schools of choice. If you want to focus more on STEM, then you have the Galileo, Christine Donnell. There are other opportunities for enrichment in the arts if they want to go that route. So those are just lots of opportunities at every level in West Ada.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And again, we always talk about options, but I think people predominantly talk about options with people who don't want to go to college. So it's awesome to hear hey, look, if you want to go deep and you want to go hard with academics right out of the blocks, you have it's a buffet, man. Get dig in as much as you want.
Yeah. So there was that aspect. Some of the other year in review items, things that were new this year. Of course, last year we addressed the non-political displays in the classroom, right? So any removal of politically oriented flags. Or surveys that asked inappropriate questions of students. Those all have to be pre-screened. So that's things that we've already done.
And a quick question. Yeah. I did do a post saying that this exact thing, that West Ada has a policy that does not tolerate this, and people lost their minds over it for some reason. And even going through the comments and hearing people be like, "This isn't the case." I would always ask, okay, have you, first off, send me a picture if you got something, and I'd be happy to post it on Instagram. I'd be happy to pass it on to whoever. If this is happening, my students go to this school district, that would be counter to the policy of the school district. I don't care for that. Help me understand. Mm-hmm. Overwhelmingly, no one, and I shouldn't say overwhelmingly, universally, no one sent me anything. Mm-hmm. And the people that did further discuss this in the comments section, I think one person admitted that there was an LGBTQ flag on a poster of student clubs that were available, and the symbol for the student club was the flag, and they were counting that as having flags all over the high school. I'm like, that's a little different. That's a student-run club that is not district-sponsored. That's not the same thing. But of course, they're presenting it as there are these flags all over the campus. Okay, you're talking about a student club poster that, and it's not. And again, maybe semantics for some people, but I think that's really important in my view, which is, hey, look, if you have a list of 20 different clubs and one of them is an LGBTQ club and there's a flag down there indicating that that's the club, that's not the same as having an LGBTQ flag flying around next to the American flag. So again, a distinction there.
Well, I mean, even at that, it's just what is given the imprimatur of the school district, right? And so when the teacher is producing anything like that, they're saying this, right? So. Right. But, every time I see these, I always get these requests and they come in and they say, well, I saw this. And, I had one very concrete example. It says, no, at Meridian High School down this hallway, there's da, 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 da. So I said, okay, that's specific. It's not hearsay. You say you've seen it. I'm going to go figure that out. So I made a called the superintendent. Superintendent said, I'll check it out. Superintendent sent somebody down, looked, reviewed. Nope, there's nothing there. Right? Report back to me. Nope, there's nothing there. Right. So, and we get this stuff I cannot tell you how many times there's kitty litter boxes in Hawaii High School. I mean, this is like the
Are there kitty litter boxes in Hawaii High School?
No. Jesus. It's just a rumor that will not die. But I think the important thing about that is that, number one, it's the set policy. But what about policy if you don't have enforcement? And this is the piece of the puzzle that's missing. I call the superintendent and the superintendent addresses that. That's not guaranteed at every school district. Right? You could have, oh yeah, it's our policy. Wink, wink, nod, nod, look the other way. Nothing ever gets done. That's not how things run here in West Ada, right? So if something is what it gets addressed quickly, right? So we take all these things seriously. There's a process by which they get vetted. And again, what typically happens is that there's a new teacher that comes, fresh out of, barnyard or something, and they're just, this is what they've been taught in their class. And so they're just like, okay. And they put it up and they aren't yet aware of how we do things. And then somebody mentions something that goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. They take it down and then it's resolved, right? And the vast majority of things are just, they're not real, right? They happened in Oakland or wherever. They didn't happen here. And people
years ago.
Right.
That's one thing that people are like, oh, I graduated in 2019. I graduated in 2020. That's not the case. Okay.
Yeah.
Did that happen yesterday? No, it was 4 years ago. Okay. Well, I can't help you with 4 years ago. We're talking about policy right now. And this policy is within the last, what is it? It's 18 months.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's kind of like, listen, if you have an issue from yesterday, hit the comments. What would be the process if somebody had a grievance or a concern like this?
Well, so, I mean, they can send it to their board members if they want. I tend to be pretty active on that. Strictly speaking, talking to the principal is always the best first step. Right?
Hit the site first.
That's generally speaking. And then there's an escalation process where if the principal is not giving you a satisfactory answer, then we escalate it to what are called the directors of instruction. They used to be called regional directors, but then after that, it goes up to the superintendent. And ultimately, if you don't get an answer from the superintendent, then you come to the board, right?
Gotcha.
So, but everybody tends to be really helpful. So we do like to follow the process just because, we are 58 schools. We are 40,000 students, 5,000 teachers and employees. So, that, and it also gets tracked properly that way. But that's always been the case that I have found, right? And I have yet to find an example of a place where it was, like, no, I'm going to just thumb my nose at the district. I'm going to do things my way. Those people tend to work for different districts pretty quickly, right? And again, so that's an administrative enforcement, right? We can set the policy as the board, but if the administration and the board don't see eye to eye, you can have a lot of potential issues there. We don't have that problem here. And so we're very appreciative of the superintendent and our administration for enforcing our policy as we see it.
There's another piece to this that I actually found out about in the fall or spring. I can't remember exactly when it was, but West Ada unilaterally decided to start taking out books from the libraries.
Well, so yes, I mean, that's the shortest answer is yes. It's a little more involved than that, but yes.
Sure. No. And again, this is obviously more involved. How did you take them out? What was the list? Yeah. What was the review process? But this was not something you were waiting for state legislators to come forward and say, hey, West Ada, you have to start taking these books out. It was, hey, we care about our libraries. We don't want inappropriate material there. We want age specific, the whole bit. And we're going to start going through an involved review process of books. We're going to identify them and slowly start removing them. Not a popular thing to do for people, but the right thing to do, at least the West Ada felt.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a proactive stance with the administration. And again, this is part of the policy that we set as a board and was prior to the legislature creating their own rules, which are now state law, but before that, where we said, we don't just want to sit and wait for things to happen, right? And we did do that. I mean, we did have a grievance process that had been in place for some time, but then we wanted to get one step ahead, where it's like, okay, let's go do a proactive review, right? And a lot of those were just, some of them were just not. They're not difficult decisions. And the funny thing is that, everybody has really passionate feelings about that. But what I always found was that people didn't want to, quote unquote, ban books in the abstract, which everybody agrees with. I agree with, board agrees with, superintendent, everybody agrees with that, right? But it's not about books in the general, it's book specific.
Right.
And some of these that we looked at had, physical graphic depictions of sexual activities. And it wasn't even decisions that necessarily libraries have made, like because people will donate books, right? And of course, for many years, we've said, yes, of course, we accept it.
Right.
You give us a book, we'll take it. Not realizing there's some people that had motives that were not necessarily the purest, right?
Right. Like A Handmaid's Tale, a graphic novel.
A graphic novel,
right? When I looked that one up, because it was on the list of the first 10, and I looked it up and I was like, wait, this is literally just like a comic book of the handmaids. Like that's absolutely just graphic depictions of sexual intercourse between, people. And then,
more than that. I mean,
right.
Violence and
oh yeah. Ridiculous things, right?
And,
right. Terrible stuff. And again, I had heard the argument that it's like, okay, put in context, a lot of these books have redemptive value, and put in context, they're not as bad as you think. And it's like, no, this is as bad as you think. And if you want to read A Handmaid's Tale, it's not like they removed that novel. They removed the graphic novel that had artist representations of these things. Inappropriate.
Yeah. And most people, when you actually start to, people have a reflexive reaction to that books in the general and the abstract.
Right.
And when you get specific, like with rare exceptions, there was nobody that was, because the argument that I always make is like, okay, are there no lines? You can't draw the line anywhere. Like there's nothing that can be, well, no, that's not true. And it's okay. So we're going to disagree on where that line should be drawn. But as long as that we understand each other, that there is a line for something that's appropriate in a school and something that isn't. And for me, it was never about, these virgin eyes are going to see something they can't see. It's like, no, most kids have access to a cell phone. The internet is far grosser than anything that we had in any of our libraries. That said, does it deserve that imprimatur? Does it deserve that seal of approval that, yes, West Ada, as our school district, we approve this material? And the answer is no. Like you have books that belong and in the Meridian Library are in the adult section. Well, guess what? We don't have adult sections in the school libraries. Nobody's an adult. Right. There's no such thing. And so the only option is removal, right? Right. And so again, the administration that understands what our policy is and not just waiting, proactively going and doing that. And not just like zipping, talking with librarians, setting up committees, right? Having a process of like, are we making the right decision here? Is this smart? And again, there were no brainers. There are places there, I think, that people would probably dispute where the line is, right? Right.
And that's fine. Like there should be that tension. There should be, I think it should be here. You think it should be there. Yeah. But there's somewhere. It's like somewhere. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So that was another thing that we did. Another thing that we did this year that was ahead of what is now state law, right? It was our gender policy, right? And so the gender policy is something that we procedure that we spearheaded where anything that had to do with anything that was sort of gender dysphoria related, right, was something that had to have parental notification, and any actions that were taken had to have express parental approval, right? And that was something that was actually a slight policy change because there was a default policy that was put into place. And we looked at it and we said, no, that's not a good policy for us. And so we changed that, and that has since been adopted by the state. Right? And so now it's state law. But that's another thing where we were sort of getting ahead of the curve and making sure that parents were intimately involved in anything that had to do with gender dysphoria with their kids, and involved with nurses and professional psychological coaching. Teachers couldn't get involved. And it's not because our teachers didn't have the heart and compassion for people that are going through that. They just don't have the training. Right? So it was something that was directed towards counselors who had professional training with that, and immediately brought parents in. And so, that was something that we instituted in place. Same thing when it came to bathroom policy. That was also something that we got ahead of in terms of state law, sports. So it's something where we're keeping a very strong approach to that, where it's like, no, there may be things that are changing in the outside world, and that may be true. I'm going way too fast for something that has proved to be ancient wisdom for many, many years. And so we'll stick with that. And if it needs to change eventually, sure, absolutely, we can do that. But we're not going to respond to social fads. And so that was something that we put into place. And of course, now it's state law, and it will probably wind up being adjudicated through Title IX choices that are being made at the federal level that are now, currently being enjoined. And we have our state attorney general who is fighting that, right, fighting for what the legislature put into place and the governor signed. And so that process will work itself out. But as far as West Ada is concerned, that's something we wanted to get ahead of. And so we did. And that was another thing that happened over the course of this year.
Right. I spoke with Representative Yamamoto about a month ago, and we were talking about the Title IX issues. And it's like, listen, Idaho can do what Idaho can do, and we will absolutely go to bat for what we think is right when the federal mandates come down. But as far as we're concerned, like, we're going to function in this way. We're not going to, again, all the nuances that come along with it, with trying to just blur the lines between people and propriety and how we should deal with kids.
I mean, and just Title IX in general. I mean, we should have more local control, right? Particularly when it comes to education matters, which typically have been, at the smallest community level, right?
Right.
And so, that's a larger argument, but again, we're doing what we think is right at our level, and have pursued it, and if we get attacked by the federal government, so be it. But a lot of things could change on that. So
yeah, right. One small point with the books, just to visit one more time. The argument that has been used to combat removal of books, not a specific book, not books in general, but the argument that, hey, kids have much worse on their cell phone, that needs to be just banished from our whole reasonable dialogue. Because I think at this point, there's an aspect of you have a whole collection of human, nastiness at your fingertips if you have a cell phone. And if the standard for should it be in our libraries or in our public schools, or should we remove it if they already have access to it? The answer should be we should not take that into account. Like if you have a chest filled with the worst aspects of human nature and depravity that a kid has access to at home, that doesn't mean that we should have it in our public school libraries. That's an absurd argument that just needs to be banished from our reasonable dialogue.
Well, I agree. Although I think that the point that I'm making is a slightly different aspect of it, right?
No, I know. I'm just making my own point.
Yeah, fair enough. Good. I'm with it.
I bring it up because I've heard a lot of people in different school boards bring this up in defense of books, which is like, well, they have way worse on their cell phone. Yeah, they have the worst of humanity, like for the history of humanity on their cell phone.
Yes.
That doesn't mean we should have it as a state in our libraries.
Yeah, that's why I think the argument of, we want to shield kids from this is a weaker argument, right? Because that's not what it is. I mean,
right.
It's you can have a situation where kids are going to drink or whatever. That doesn't mean that you make alcohol legal, right? You still should have standards. You still should say, these are the things that we believe in. These are the principles. We're going to stand by them, and we don't care what people think.
Right.
So, and
it should be not public school sponsored. Like kids might have underage drinking, but that's absolutely not something West Ada should ever participate in. It's like, well, they have access to alcohol at home.
Yeah, so
I don't care.
Start serving beer at the football games.
Oh God, man, come on, man.
So I think that's where that. So anyway, I think we're.
Yeah. And again, it's just, it's one of those, it's something that I've had a lot of conversations about this, and it bothers me whenever people bring that up. It's like, just stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last aspect of the gender policy was just that we're sticking with the English language. We're sticking with English grammar. So we're not using fabricated pronouns or anything like that. We're teaching English, state standards. We're following the state standards. And so, again, state law now, but no employee or anyone could be sanctioned in any way for not using compelled speech, socially compelled speech. So that was a sort of, that was a large aspect of things that we took on this year and got into place. And now, of course, as state law has made it all, obviated it because it's now state law, but we wanted to make sure that it was the case from the beginning of the year.
Right. Right. And that was not an easy, Representative Hill brought that before the compulsory gender language. Yeah. That was not an easy lift. So, it's entirely possible that bill didn't pass, but West Ada, again, ahead of the curve and just saying, look, whatever happens at the state level, fine, but this is what's appropriate for our district.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and another thing, year in review, dress code was revamped this year. So our dress code was put into place, and the net effect of that was mostly to remove costuming. All right. So,
I was going to say tails.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And so it's anything that's a distraction, right? It could also be things that are overly provocative, right? Or either provocative messages, provocative sexually, but and gender neutral, right? That was something that was really important for us. But but if it's a distraction in the classroom and it's taken away from the learning environment, no.
Gotcha.
And so and the enforcement on that is tougher, right? Just as a practical matter. So I think that maybe I'll add that to the list of things that we can continue to work on. But by and large, it was well received and relaxed and took a lot of the pressure off. Even to the kids who felt like, it's sort of keeping up with the Joneses on that. So dress code was another thing that we revamped and got put into place this year.
Gotcha.
And so then the last really major piece that we had this year was the cell phone policy, which we just passed last night, and that passed 5-0. And so that is removing cell phones and other personal electronic devices from the instructional periods, right? So when the learning's going on, devices have to go away. We're leaving it up to the individual schools, whether or not that's in a locker or in a vault, which are sort of at the door as you come in the classroom, and that'll be something that we'll be very, very keenly aware for enforcement, right? But we felt that was really important. The research on that is, overwhelming now. It's pretty obvious, and so that's something where we felt it was important as a district to implement, and it took us, close to a year because we really wanted to get it right. So we looked at various other districts, what was working, what wasn't. We talked to parents, we talked to teachers, administration, talked to students. Students very supportive. Some parents were actually, there were a small number of parents, not many, but small number of parents who were very concerned about it. They just wanted to make sure they had 24/7 access available to their kids at all time and any time. But that passed, and so that'll be new for the school year upcoming. Cell phones out of the classrooms.
Okay.
We got a lot done.
And this is a big one. Okay, so for the cell phones,
Yeah.
to be clear, this is, hey, in the classroom while class is in session, we are not going to have cell phone access. In between, people can check their cell phones.
It'll be on a school by school basis.
Okay, so if there's a school that says, hey, I want it in a vault in your bag, I don't want to see it for this entire school day, that includes lunch, that includes breaks, great, the school can do that. But at the very least, at the district level, you cannot have cell phones out or using them while in class.
Yeah, so there will be exceptions for instructional, like actual instructional time, right? So if the teacher says, okay, I want you to look this up or something, that's allowed.
On a cell phone?
On a cell phone. There may be a reason. We wanted to, again, we learned from other districts. Some districts use those, right? We have devices, one-to-one devices, so we probably won't need that. But if for whatever reason the they want to run an experiment, right? Or do a statistics class, whatever. I mean, I'm making stuff up on the fly, right? The reality is if that is something, and we say rare occasions, right? We don't want it to be, okay, everybody gets cell phone day today, right?
Right.
For IEP plans or anything that's a medically related thing. So a lot of students have glucose monitoring, right? That's built into their phone. Exceptions for that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So again, we tried to be as smart about it, and I'm sure we missed some things, to be sure, right?
Sure.
But
a step in the right direction.
For sure.
Like, look, this may not be great, and maybe we make revisions along the way, but this is a big step in the right direction.
Yeah, and so for instance, one of the things that we really struggled on was watches, right? Well, what about a watch, right? And so, as a practical decision, we said, okay, we're going to allow devices, and we'll just see how well it works, right? But if the kids are constantly doing this as opposed to doing this, then we'll have to adjust. So we're going to be flexible. Like, we're just results based. What's working? Right. Is it working? Great. Do more of that. Is it not working? Let's do something different.
Right. And the watch is a little bit, I think the watch is a little bit better of a, you got to give a little bit. It's like, listen.
Not necessarily. I was against it to be start, but I was convinced.
I'm not, listen, you know my position. I say burn it all down, but I recognize that to have a functional policy, you got to give a little bit to people that are concerned about it. So it's kind of like, look, if you have a watch, it's going to be really hard to be scrolling Instagram on a watch. Yeah. It's going to be really hard to text message frequently and aggressively on a watch. It's different, but you can get a hold of somebody if you have to. It's an emergency device. Like my kids have gizmo watches that they take with them, and they don't wear them. They're in a case in their backpack, but they have them there. And in the event that they need to communicate with us, they absolutely can. So it's kind of like, all right, look, you're not getting in any trouble on a gizmo watch or like, a bark phone or something like that. Yeah. But again, just speaking about small wearable devices, it's like, okay, that should help a little bit, I would think, at least with the people that are hyper concerned with connectivity, even though in an emergency situation, you don't want 30 kids all looking at their watches and having the teacher picking up a phone from an office, getting some emergency instructions, and then trying to convey these things to kids that are distracted or on the phone off of their watch. You want the kids locked onto the teacher, taking emergency instruction and acting accordingly. Yep. So the parents and again, I understand the concern. I don't want my kids to get hurt. And if something happens, God forbid, I want to be able to connect to my baby as quick as possible.
Yeah.
But that's also not the safest thing to have 30 kids in a classroom doing. The safest thing is to entrust at least a little bit the adult that you have, given your kids to, that they have some appropriate protocol.
No, so I think, Larry, I think that's right. I mean, and everything is always a trade-off, right? I mean, there's no magic solutions. There's no magic bullet. Everything is always a trade-off. And so when you take a look at the instructional time that's lost by a distraction, and it doesn't even have to be dinging. You can just be waiting for it to ding.
Right.
And you're not thinking about what's being taught from you in front of the classroom. So, and look, I mean, the students are the ones who are very, very responsible. I talked to the superintendent, went out and talked to all the student councils, and they're like, look, we really appreciate this, right? It's going to relieve the pressure. Because a lot of us just feel like, they're FOMO, right? They're like, we don't want to miss out. Everybody else is keeping up. I've got to keep up with everybody else. It's a very natural human reaction. It's built into these devices by design. And when you remove that, okay, well now suddenly that pressure is gone, right? Because I know that I'm not going to miss out because everybody is missing out. Right. Therefore, I'm even keel. Right. Right.
It's a similar argument to the uniform argument versus dress code, which is, hey, look, instead of anybody worrying about what they're wearing, fancy, revealing, whatever it is, everybody wears this thing and you take the pressure off. You don't have to worry about what you're wearing.
Yep, exactly. So that was another policy thing that we put into place this year.
These are huge pieces.
I think so.
These are huge. And again, the cell phone, the gender neutral, all of it. This is kind of at the heart. When I talk to people that are considering moving up here, they're predominantly worried about their children. They're worried about the educational system. These things are at the heart of why they dislike the public education system in other states. And the fact that West Ada, again, is going out of its way before it's legislated to take care of these things, it's just, I'm very proud of that. And again, I'm not the one doing it, but I'm proud to be part of the district.
Yeah, it's remarkable accomplishment. And I mean, we just feel that if we can provide that best possible education, no distractions, whether they be political distractions or social distractions or electronic distractions or dress distractions, whatever they are, all these things take away from the thing that we're trying to provide, which is teaching our kids.
Right.
So let's just focus on that. And again, this is not difficult, right? No. I mean, difficult in implementation because there's a lot of forces that want to pull you away from that, right? Whether it would be social app vendors or people that have agendas that they want to put into the schools or whatever it might be. There's a lot of pressure. So there's, it does take some strength and some focus, but, it reflects the community that we have here. It's what people are really excited about. And listen, there's a lot who aren't. There's a lot who want to go to neighboring districts, right, where they have different perspective on that. And that's perfectly fine. That's great. Like local control, local decisions, but here in West Ada, it's been pretty clear what the public has been asking for. And, we feel that we've been delivering on it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. The big last one is funding schools. Talk to me about the levy.
So what we're talking about is an operational levy, which in technical jargon is called the supplemental levy. And what happens is that it can get really, really complicated, but let's talk about the two main areas. One area is facilities, right? That's your physical plant, your schools, your physical property, the land that it sits on. And then you have operations, your pencils, your paper, and of course, mostly your teacher salary, right? Custodians. And those are two separate items. So what's on the ballot for May 21st, and I voted, I got my voted sticker. You can early vote right now. Is what's called the supplemental levy. And so what happens is that the state provides the majority of the funding that we have, over 80%, 87% of the funding comes from state funding directly, right? And they have a thing that's called the funding formula, and it's a whole different topic maybe for another day, but it's basically the primary funding source comes from the state. But that doesn't necessarily cover all of the costs, right? Because for instance, West Ada, they measure the formula statewide, which favors a lot of the rural districts. We have a lot deeper expenses here in terms of cost of living. And so what happens is that each individual district is able to float what they call a supplemental levy. And that goes directly to operations. So it pays for salaries, papers, pencils, all the things that makes the school run. Those can only be authorized for up to 2 years. You can't do it for any longer. There are some certain circumstances where that's the case, but it's marginal. And more than 60% of the districts in the state of Idaho have some form of supplemental levy. In some cases, it's upwards of 20% of their budget. For ours, it's closer to 5% of the budget. But 5% of the budget still represents, several hundred teachers and security. In our case, 152 directly represents 152 teachers and 19 SROs, school resource officers, police security on our campuses.
And that's a big issue that people have. I mean, obviously, we had Bill 415 that would have made schools Second Amendment zones. That did not pass, but school security is at the foremost of people's mind.
Well, we may actually have a larger discussion on that in the School Sentinel program, but it's not policy yet. That'll be another thing for next year. But anyway, so that's the operational funding piece of the puzzle. So the other side of the puzzle is the sort of facilities, because a lot of people may have seen that the state recently passed Bill 521 and the governor signed, which provides facilities funding statewide, in which West Ada received its proportional share to the student population, but it was a significant amount of money, over $140 million over 10 years, right? When you start to break that down, it's actually $14 million per year over 50 schools. So it's not as much as it seems.
Right.
For a rural district, that would be astronomical. For us, it's, it would kind of help us keep, paint together, but we'll still obviously do some really important work on, air conditioning and so forth. But,
Sure.
So those are sort of facilities. Facilities money cannot be used for operations. So when you have facilities money, it's like, you have a mortgage, pays for your house. You can't then go use it to go on a junket to, Vegas. So these two are completely separate, and people get confused on this all the time. I totally understand. It makes perfect sense, but that's the way to separate it. Like, one of these is your mortgage and one of these is your salary. Right. And so, the levy that we put into place is actually a reduction. It's 30 cents per 100,000, but it's still a reduction where we're trying to head in that right direction so that the operational costs maintain our low level. Right. We talked about how do you maintain this? Well, we want to continue to work and be as efficient as possible. That 6% G&A is part of the reason that we do that. Our overall size and the economies of scale is part of the reason that we're able to do that, right? But every 2 years that has to be renewed. And if it doesn't get renewed, then you lose the funding and you have to cut back on your operations, right? And
again, our G&A is already really low. So like people say, just eliminate managers or eliminate administration. It's like, how much more could you eliminate?
So I think there's three things that I see that happen, right? The first thing is that, you sort of take it out of administration, or you be more efficient, right? So, you could eliminate all the administrators that we have right now, and it would still, it would have some marginal impact, but it's just not practical. We're the second largest employer in the Treasure Valley. We have 5,000, people that we manage, transportation system, largest in the state, 58 campuses, over 382 square miles. You have to run that. The question is, are you doing so efficiently, right? And people always turn to, I saw a teacher that had 2 erasers and they only could have gotten away with 1. Like, all that stuff is going to happen, and all of it is true. There's always going to be inefficiencies in any system. The question is, on balance, how are you performing? We're performing at $6,300 per student, which is a third of the national average, half of the state average, and are producing top 20 results, top 15 results, right? And for us in the state, number 1 in math, number 1 in reading, plus all of our CTE. And we're doing that for a fraction of other school districts across the country. So that's sort of, the one thing that they do. The second thing is that people always say, well, let somebody else pay for it, right? Let the developers pay for it through impact fees, or have the state provide more money, or, go raid Obama's stash, or whatever. The federal government can do, and all those things are true. Like, you can get money from other sources, but the only thing that's within our control is what we do ourselves. Right. So we can either choose to support our schools, and this is a mechanism that we have to support our schools, or, we can hope that somebody else does it, but have no control over that. And if they don't come through, is that what we're going to tell our kids? Yeah, well, I'm sorry,
right.
The impact fees didn't come through. What am I going to tell you, right? And then we start to fall back on some of that performance in math, performance in reading, performance in CTE. I mean, all those things will have an impact. Now, look, we still operate really, really efficiently, so we're better off than most. I mean, there are some that if their levy doesn't pass, they're looking at 25% cut. 5% cut is, it's not the best, right? And anybody that would have a 5% salary cut would feel it, right? And would start to have an impact, as it would with us. But I do think that we tend to get a little bit lost in the scale. So if you actually go to the Ada County Assessor's Office and you go back and you look at what was West Ada's per 100,000 tax levy for West Ada, and this includes everything. It includes supplementals. Sure. But in 20 years ago, in 2004, it was $669.81 per 100,000. That was West Ada. And 10 years ago, in 2014, it was $408.70, right? And that was 10 years ago. And so the 2024 rate currently today is $59.90. So it's a more than 85% reduction over the past 10 years and a more than 95% reduction over the past 20 years. And if this levy is renewed, then that will continue to go down by another 30 cents, right? In that direction. And so when you're talking about those types of numbers, right? When you're providing the number one in math, when you're achieving number one in reading, when you're providing CTE, when you're adjusting your strategic plan, when you're removing distractions from the classroom, when you're implementing policies that put the parents in control, when you have dress codes that are in place that are designed to keep the focus on the kids, when you're removing cell phones from the classroom, you're doing all of these things at a West Data level. At some point, I hope that people simply say, why don't we take the win? Why don't we just take the win? Why don't we look at this and say, this is fundamentally how public education should be done. Providing the best for the least amount of money, taxes continuing to go down a fraction of what they've been in not too distant past. In fact, over 75% drop since this board took over, since just 2019. At some point, you have to say, you know what? I like winning. I want to win. And yet there's just a lot of people that are just so against public education, I guess, as a concept, which I should say that I do appreciate that position. And
you actually said that the first time we spoke.
Yeah.
And I asked you about it. And again, you made it clear that you think there's a world or an avenue, but this is what we have now. We have a fundamental requirement to provide public education.
We have a constitutional requirement in the state of Idaho to provide public education.
Right.
That's that. And so if you disagree with that, then your beef is with the legislature to have them remove that constitutional requirement or alter it in some form. Right. And I respect that position. I totally respect that position. In fact, in my magic world, I would almost even prefer that. But as long as we're going to have a public education, we have an obligation to do it the best that we possibly can.
Right.
And hollow it out from the inside just out of pique. I mean, at one point we're going to say, because it's funny, this sort of online conversation saying, well, if you don't pass this levy, you're just punishing the teachers, right? And if you want to punish the district, this is not going to accomplish that. And I say to myself, punish the district. Punish the district that's giving you this bathroom policy, that's giving you this library policy, that's giving you this cell phone policy, that's giving you this number one in reading, number one in math, CTE. This is what you want to punish? We fought really, really hard to develop what we think is the best public education in the state of Idaho and a model for the nation. At some point, we have to say, I want to win. I want to take the win. I'm tired of losing. Because for years, going on 5 decades, conservatives in particular have abandoned public education. How's that worked out? And we're seeing the wages of that decision at our college campuses and in school districts around the country. So I don't want to abandon public education. I do want to make it the best that it can be. And I do appreciate that there are people that are holding our feet to the fire. Without that feet to the fire, then things could backslide very, very easily. But at some point, we have to take the win. And if the solution to that is to support what are pretty modest in terms of $59 versus the $600 that it's been in the past. And I mean, dramatically less than everybody else, both locally in the Treasure Valley as well as the country. And this is the return that you're getting on this investment. I say, let's take the win. So that's how I feel about that.
We've talked about a lot of things, Mr. Binetti. I appreciate you. Thank you for laying this all out. I hope we can do this more frequently.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time today, and thanks for what you're doing for West Data.
All right. Take care, man.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.